Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Writers Podcast. And today I have with me a very special guest, so you want to strap in, and we've got one of the top guns in the writing publishing industry, and that is Richard Chizmar of Cemetery Dance. Hello, sir.
Hello. Hey, thanks for having me.
Not a problem. As I mentioned before we went on air, it's quite an honor to have you on. Your magazine and your writing have made quite a big impact in the horror genre of writing. So I've been reading your magazine for years, and I'm always following you on Twitter, where you put up a lot of great stuff. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. So Cemetery Dance, 1988. That's 30 plus years now.
Almost 35. 35 years next. It'll be 35 years next summer that we started working on the mag, and 35 years next December that the first issue was published. Wow. So we're like the land of the dinosaurs.
I have a question about that, but we'll get to that in a sec. Where did the name come from, Cemetery Dance?
It came from I believe it was the second short story that I ever sold. It was probably the 9th or 10th that I had written, or I can't even remember that, but it was the second sale I had. And originally the magazine was going to be called Night Chills. I actually still have a cover mock-up, a hand-drawn cover mock-up of the premiere issue with the title as Night Chills. Just a lot of the feedback that I received was that there were an awful lot of anthologies and titles and magazines with night in them, and the same thing with Chills. No one had combined the two yet, but it worried me that there may be some confusion, and I wanted to stand out a little bit more. So I remembered when that story was published, a whole lot more people talked about the title than they did the quality and the contents of the actual story, which was funny. But yeah, the title stuck out for people, and a lot of comments about the title. So I thought, you know what, maybe that's a sign, and that should go on the front of the magazine.
Yeah, just definitely an eye-catching name for sure, and quite appropriate for the fiction that you ended up publishing with it as well.
Yes.
You did mention that you are a bit of a dinosaur now. Always a sobering thought, because we all feel like we're still 25 inside. What's your thoughts on the state of the industry and now as compared to when you started?
It couldn't be more different in a lot of ways, but I still run across posts online that sound an awful lot like one of the letters to the editors I would have seen back then in a magazine. And those warm my heart, because it shows that some folks still really do, both as creators and readers or viewers, if we're talking about film, that there still are these folks out there with real genuine appreciation and love for the genre. But I mean, there was no internet. Desktop design publishing was a new thing. Laser printing, the ability to do these things at home were brand new. And that's something I couldn't afford until year 3 or 4. Printed the first issue at the University of Maryland's computer lab, where they told you, please do not print more than 15 pages at a time. And my roommate and I, the first issue was 48 pages, and we printed 2 copies. And my roommate and I hit print on those 96 copies and took off out of the room and came back an hour later. To a long line and some upset students. But yeah, it was so different. I mean, Twilight Zone magazine, there were so many, there was a wealth of small press magazines back then. And there were these pro ones. There were Twilight Zone magazine, Night Cry, Omni was publishing back then. The only ones that are still around from back then are probably like the Magazine of Science Fiction and Fantasy. Fangoria in its in its rebirth now, but it was back then, it was one of the holy grails. And then more importantly, there was just this a huge number of small press underground magazines, much like Cemetery Dance, The Horror Show and Gru and Death Realm. And I could probably rattle off 20 and forget another 30 or 40. That's how many there were. And it really was almost like this minor league proving ground for writers and artists. And a lot of quality material was published there. And there was a real sense of community. It was interesting. But everything was done by direct mail, and you buying mailing lists instead of clicking a button on your computer. Submissions were done in snail mail, U.S. Postal and worldwide, the post office. And it was a different time. And it feels very innocent now to look back. And I'm very nostalgic. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that the beginning writer is pleased that they do not have to take frequent trips to the post office and use self-addressed stamped envelopes and all that. But and then as far as the content, the horror field goes through these cycles, and you get the graphic horror, then you get the quiet horror, then you get more horror pushing boundaries, you get supernatural, you get psychological. There's no real difference. It just all spins around, and what was old becomes new again, and then the whole process happens again.
Yeah. I'm curious from a publishing perspective, because you founded the magazine when the focus was on print, hard copies and that. How have you found it? What's your approach now with soft digital editions of books and that? Do you embrace that, or does that worry you, or how do you feel about that?
No, again, I'm a dinosaur in many ways. I was like old fashioned even when I started the magazine in many ways. Mm-hmm. I've always been more of a traditionalist, and it's just my nature.
Right.
But with that said, so yeah, when ebooks came out, digital copies that you could read on your computer and those kind of things. Yeah, I won't deny I was one of kind of the old guys, the old farts kind of staring over the fence at my neighbor with my eyes squinting like, I've got my eye on you.
Yeah.
But I've learned to embrace them.
Mm-hmm.
To me, whatever gets folks reading is an invaluable tool. So for myself, I'd much rather hold that paperback or that hardcover in my hands and read it.
Mm-hmm.
I have read ebooks. I'm way behind the curve on audiobooks. So many people, including my son, listen to audiobooks regularly. And I have people whose opinions I really value who tell me, oh, you got to try this book on audio. But I guess, I don't do that much driving unless I'm with my wife driving to see my youngest son at college.
Mm-hmm.
And use that time to catch up and communicate with each other. So I'm not listening. And other than that, it would be, maybe when I'm working outside. But so no, I'm fine with all the new technology. And we've had books that have done extraordinarily well in the form of ebooks. So yeah, I have no complaints.
Yeah, that's good. Because as somebody not living in the States, obviously now shipping has become so expensive. So digital options are great for international readers. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right now, overseas shipping is ridiculous. And it seems, we've had a run recently and inexplicably where it's taking just ridiculous amounts of time to reach the destination.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems random. Send out 10 or 15, overseas packages in one loop to the post office. And we've got 10 people say, it arrived fine. And then we have 5 more who are just like, still not here. And so, yeah, you're right. As far as overseas readers, it's pretty wonderful.
Yeah. This is maybe too vast of a question, but I'll ask it and you can approach it how you want. But because your magazine has been around for so long, you've had the opportunity to showcase a lot of writers, be they new or established or forgotten. I'm just curious which writers off the top of your head you're really proud of been able to represent in your magazine and introduce them to readers.
Yeah, so as far as introducing, I look back at the older days and the fact that we published really early stuff from people like Norman Partridge and Bentley Little and Ronald Kelly and who else? So I'm trying to think of some of the folks who are still out there doing it. But those guys, I mean, Gary Bromback back then, who doesn't write nearly enough. That was always my, and it wasn't an original one. I was going to say it was always my vision for the magazine, but that's something I loved about Dave Silva's The Horror Show, which was just a wonderful magazine published back in the 80s. He always showcased these big names, Dean Koontz and Robert McCammon and Joe Lansdale. But Joe wasn't a huge name then, but he published these readily recognizable classic authors right next to people like Poppy Bright, who was brand new back then.
Right.
Also Bentley Little and quite a few others, Gary Razor. And that was always my goal is I thought, I could publish a magazine featuring all new writers and I'm doing the genre a pretty neat service there. But it's going to be a struggle marketing wise. The ceiling's going to, I think I'm going to meet that ceiling pretty quickly. But if I'm able to publish these new writers next to Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Richard Matheson and Lansdale and David Morrell and all the others, Clyde Barker, then yeah, people are going to pick these up and they're going to discover these newer writers.
Right.
And that was always my goal from the beginning.
Cool. One of your regular contributors is Bev Vincent, who I've known for quite a while. I understand that you and him were at was it the Dark Tower premiere screening with Stephen King?
Yeah.
And he came up to you guys with the idea for the Flight or Fright book?
He did. We were eating dinner ahead of time. I went up with, I'm trying to think, the one with Bev, because I also went up for the first installment of It.
Oh, okay.
One of the times, just my oldest son and I went up. Oh, no, that's right. One of the times, my wife and I and my oldest son Billy went up, and then the other time it was both of my sons, Billy, Noah, and myself. And I don't remember which time that was, but on both instances, we went up early, had met Steve and Marcia and his office staff and some friends and some family, had a diner up there and had dinner, and we all went over to the theater. So it was during dinner. And yeah, we were talking about flights, and Steve hates it. I hate it. Bev probably chimed in that he hated it. And the next thing I know, he's like, Steve said it, we should do an anthology of scary flying stories, and he rattled off a couple classic tales, and he said, we'll get some new ones, and he said, I'll write a story for it. Bev, you and I edit it. Rich, you publish it. And that was it. I mean, but yeah, it was just like, that's how it happened. Yeah. In the space of 90 seconds. Yeah.
So when something like that happens, are you in shock, or is that you're used to that because you're in the industry?
Yeah, that would have given me a major heart attack 20 years ago.
Right.
But now, here's the thing. Is it a shock? No. Do I still feel like the luckiest guy in the world when something like that happens? Absolutely.
Right.
That all is still very, I've been to dinners and lunches and been to his house and ball games and worked with him for a number of years. And now I've written with him.
Right.
So in many ways, that entire thing is still surreal and ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because I started all this because of my love for Steve King's work.
Right.
So yeah, talk about coming full circle. But yeah, I've just been really fortunate and grateful to experience that a few different times with different kinds of projects. But
right.
So yeah, not quite shocked, but just still an immense feeling of gratitude.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure probably for Bev it was a bit more of a shock. But
yeah, I think so. Even though Bev and Steve are good friends.
Yeah.
And had worked on some nonfiction stuff together before. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Bev walked out of there floating on cloud nine, as did I. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, for sure. So that makes for a good segue into books, and specifically stuff that you've written. And I want to start off with, for myself, I think the first thing I read from you was your collection, A Long December, which is a collection of short stories. And I was really blown away by your sense of place. I know Stephen King obviously is Maine, but you have that as well in your book. And that, I think, if anybody, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if they're not familiar with your writing, I think that book would be a fantastic place to start, because there's like a lot of stuff in there that you write that is really, really across a wide spectrum of stuff. And
yeah, no, I agree. Thank you. It's the thing with A Long December is it was one of those books where you have a lot to draw from, because I've written a lot of short stories, and then I got away from writing prose, and then was working in film, and then I came back and just focused on the publishing again, and then a few short stories started popping out again, and I fell in love with the process again, and I realized that writing film had really helped me become a better writer and a more confident writer. And once I had accumulated a handful of new things and written a new novella, I realized it was time for a new collection. So I was able to go back and pick what I thought were the stories that best represented me and how I felt about the genre. So yeah, there's a lot of different things in there. There's a lot of stories of varying length. Psychological, supernatural, a little bit of everything, but most of it's humanity based, and just about human nature and the dark side, and when it intersects. And yeah, I'm glad you liked it. I do think that's a good book for folks who are not familiar with my work to wade in with.
Yeah, I got a real Castle Rock, Robert McCammon Boys Life vibe from the whole collection. I was really enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you. Well, what was interesting is when I put it together, I did story notes for each story. So I really went back and reread. And what was interesting is I never realized how, I had my own Castle Rock in Edgewood, Maryland. And I never realized how many of those stories mentioned a weeping willow tree, because I grew up with a giant weeping willow tree in my side yard, and it was one of my safe places. And one of my safe havens. And then there was Winter's Run Creek where we always fished, and just a lot of repeating imagery. And yeah, I had no idea I was doing it all those years, and it was neat to see it tied together. And it's interesting because when it came, I'm sure you'll be talking about this, but when we get to the Gwendy stuff, never really asked Steve, hey, why me? Because he's friends with an awful lot of really talented writers, and he's collaborated very, very rarely. And I never did ask why, but during the course of an interview, the woman who was talking to us, she asked him, so why did you pick Rich? And I was glad. I was like, yeah, Steve, why did you pick me? And what his answer was, I had just finished reading A Long December. And he just said, Rich has a real grasp of small town Americana, of the normal everyday folks, and they're coming and going. And he writes with that detailed eye, which really transports you there. And he said, I just thought if anyone could finish Gwendy at his button box, it would be Rich. So it was my good fortune that he had just finished reading that book, and he liked it.
Right. That's that's a good segue into that. But I have to ask, I know Steve's always had that, he likes to tell that story about, he's got this story idea about women going into a woman's washroom and never coming back out. Have you ever pitched
well, that's the thing. I've never really pitched him anything. I mean, there was a day there was a time sometime in the last year when I had no intentions of doing it, but I was straightening up my office, and we moved into a new house about 3 years ago. So it's been this gradual process of straightening out my home office and unpacking boxes from the warehouse at Cemetery Dance, from the old house. I find all these buried treasures. And one of the things I found was just an old manuscript of the plant. And I sat down and I reread it instead of doing the work I was supposed to be doing that afternoon. And I thought, when I got to the end, which is not the end, I thought, oh man, I would love to finish the plant. But no, I'm not going to ask Steve that. He knows what he has that's never ended. And if he ever has the itch and I'm the name that comes up, then hell yes, I will agree enthusiastically. But I've never really. Yeah. I'm just grateful for the ride so far.
Yeah. Like for me, there's probably two projects I'd like to see him continue. Would be obviously now with the passing of Peter Straub, there's still like the third book in the Talisman trilogy. I'd love to see that book. And I understand that it's all mostly plotted out. So I don't know what will happen with that. I'd like to see that.
I wouldn't be surprised if he writes it. I've never asked him. Yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe we'll wake up one day missing his friend Peter and think this is the way to be with him for the next 6 months.
Right. Yeah. And the other one's a personal one for me. It would be, because I love what he did with Father Callahan in the Dark Tower series, I'd love to have like a follow-up story with Ben Mears and Mark Petrie to see what they did.
Oh, me too.
And I think that would make a great TV series too. But yeah, I would love to see that.
And it's probably more likely to be written as a television series than a novel. But you never know. I mean, I was shocked when he did Dr. Sleep. And
same here.
So you never know. And I mean, and that was certainly. I still haven't seen the final episode of the new Stand, which is essentially, I know he wrote the script, and that's essentially a sequel.
Right. Yeah. So turning back to the Gwendy trilogy, you mentioned how the first book came about. I'm really curious about the second book because you wrote that by yourself. How did that come about?
I did. Well, you know what? When we were doing press for the first book, we were asked fairly frequently if we ever thought about doing a sequel. And we both said, well, I laid back unless I was doing a solo interview because I'm not going to answer for Steve.
Sure.
And the truth of it is we had never discussed it. We had never thought of it.
Right.
The first book, literally from the time it was mentioned, we started talking about collaborations. So he sent it to me and said, hey, do what you want with it. And then I wrote, and then he wrote, and all that happened in the space of 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks maybe. And then there really was a looking at each other and said, now what? And the only reason we decided to publish it as a little hardcover was because we had done something similar with Blockade Billy. So there was no plan, there was no master plan or strategy. We just wrote the book and we were like pleased when it actually hit the bestseller list and people seemed to like it. No discussion of a sequel. Steve's answer was always there's no plans to write one and there's no plans not to write one. He's not huge on sequels.
Right.
Well, I had a dream one day, and this was when I'm not very interested in politics, but I was interested for a number of years because of state of this country. And so I watched a lot of television news, which is, again, unlike me. I never did that before, and I haven't done it since. But I woke up one morning with just a really clear picture in my mind that Gwendy Peterson was going to run for Congress. And I emailed Steve, actually, and I just said, hey, I think I know what Gwendy's been doing in the interim. I think she's a successful novelist who is going to run for Congress. And Steve wrote me right back. And I didn't say anything about a sequel. I just simply said that. I think I know what our girl's been doing. And he wrote me right back, and he said, this is a brilliant idea. I'm going to be busy with Holly Gibney for the foreseeable future, but you need to write it. So I took that as, and this is a true story. I've never wavered from telling this story. I took that as, Rich, you write the first draft because I'm busy, and then I'll come back later, and because we're a team here.
Sure.
And make you look smart. But what happened is I told him at some point, hey, I'm finished the book. You want to read it? He's like, yes, please, send it over. I sent it, and he wrote me back and just essentially said, Rich, this is all you. He's like, I'm really enjoyed it. If you want, I can do an editorial pass and give you some notes. But this is all you. Now, I'll never forget it. I was like, are you sure? I said, I never would have brought back Castle Rock from the dead. I never would have brought back the deputy as a sheriff. I said, I wouldn't have had the cojones to do that.
Right.
And he's just like, yeah, no, this one's all you. So, wow. Yeah, it was, that was a shock. That goes in the shock column. And I was slightly terrified. It was neat to have Steve as an editor. I still have the marked up manuscript. Right. Save that for my kids. But yeah, I thought it was going to be, you feel fearless when a book goes out and your name's under Steve's. Right. But this one was Castle Rock, and I was all by myself. And I think he wrote that introduction as a way of signaling to the constant readers out there that, hey, be nice. I'm involved in this too, but he has my full support here, because that's what I told him. I said, these guys might want to drag me out and tar and feather me. But yeah, it ended up being a good experience, and better than that, it ended up being a dream experience, and was really pleased with it.
Which then led to the third book.
Right. And that was, and what was interesting is when Simon & Schuster, when it was time for them to market the second book, Wendy's Magic Feather, they actually approached us, meaning me, and they actually said there are many marketing opportunities and strategies that are available if we can call this series or a trilogy. Would that be okay with you? And I said, well, I've got to ask Steve, because I don't know if it will be. And to my surprise, Steve was like, yeah, they can say it's a trilogy. I don't know when they'll get book 3 and if it'll be us or you or. And I told him, I said, it could be us, it could be me, it could be you, right? Whatever you want. But I was just thrilled that there was going to be a book 3. And that came from Simon & Schuster, which was like a neat thing to happen. But the third book came about Sunday evening, watching a movie with my wife, and I start getting texts from Steve, which is not unusual. But what is unusual is that they're long texts, they're lengthy texts, and they're all about Gwendy in outer space. And I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah, when you think about it on the surface of it, it does sound pretty wild.
Oh my gosh, it was like, on one hand, I was thrilled because he was clearly excited about this idea, and I very quickly said, we're going to write this one together. And he's like, yeah, can you block some time in September and October? And he said, I think this one should be a full-length book. And could just tell he was very excited. And I was doubly excited that we'd be going back and doing it together. And I was also very weary because I'm like, well, I know nothing about outer space and spaceships, and this is crazy. But the more he told me what his idea was, the more I was just excited to go. And yeah, so he opened up the book, and true to form, he was very, I thought to myself at some point, I bet you it doesn't take till September to start, because he seems really into it. And sure enough, like the second week of August, he's like, hey, I'm ready to write. Let's do it. So yeah, it was a great experience. And there was very little discussion of what we wanted the other person to do. It was just a lot of trust and a lot of fun. I mean, that's the word I used with most when I was doing publicity. I just kept saying it was fun. Right. The first book I was terrified and I had a great time, But it was a short novella, and we were in and we were out, and it was over. And I there were many times I was left after the fact thinking, did that really happen?
Right.
This was a moderately longer process. It probably only took us a couple months, but we were really delving deeper into the Stephen King universe. And it was such an enjoyable process going back and forth. Like I said, neither one of us narrowing where the other writer could go, just essentially saying, hey, here's where I am. Take it where you take it next. If we had some plot point that we thought maybe would be interesting, we'd mention it, but that was it. And just did these 50-page sections and went back and forth like that. And it was challenging, and it was so much fun. And I was the one who got to take us back to Derry in my section, and then send it to Steve and said, hey, I know I'm treading on sacred ground here. So if you'd rather not, then scratch that out and we'll keep it in Castle Rock, or we'll do it somewhere else. And he just enthusiastically supported it and made it better and expanded on it. And then how it was the whole process. So it was, it was a wonderful experience.
Do you have to know the end of your story when you write it? Because obviously Stephen hates that very idea. So I assume.
No, he actually said early on when it was because it was never really discussed, but it was, I guess in a way it was, because in a way he just said, I don't want to know where you're going ahead of time and blah, blah. And I remember I still have an email that essentially says, so strap in because we're going for a ride. So yeah, no, with Button Box, we had no idea where it was going to end.
Right.
So we had no idea if there were even a sequel possibilities. When I wrote the second one, I didn't leave it open-ended or anything. I just wrote a self-contained story, but there was no thoughts until, like I said, we got to the marketing part.
Right.
And then with this one, we had an idea what would happen at the end, but no, not in any great detail, and with really no roadmap to knowing how it was going to happen.
Is that how you write your own things too?
For the most part. I mean, I have found, like with a couple of my other books, with Chasing the Boogeyman, for instance, so much of the story was flying in my face at me that at some point I started writing everything down to make sure I wouldn't forget anything, because that's a lesson I've learned over the years. No matter how vibrant something is in your mind, like especially after dreams. No matter how many times I've told myself, I will never forget that because it's so cool. It's such a great idea. Or it's such a good scene. And then 2 hours later, I'm going, oh my God, it is completely gone. So with Chasing the Boogeyman and a couple other projects, there have been times when so much of the storyline has been flying in my face that I have stopped and written it down. And I found what's interesting is I found that I'm the kind of writer that with an outline, with that roadmap, I write very quickly. But I'm also not very neurotic about following that roadmap. If something else comes up, I've got no problem scratching what I originally had planned or adding to it or subtracting from it. So I have found that those kind of outlines, once I've started the process, I've never done it ahead of time.
Right.
But I found them to be really invaluable. And like I said, with the book I just turned in, I didn't outline it all from the very beginning. But once I got into the story, same thing happened. I started writing things down. And I pretty much had probably 2/3 of or maybe 3/4 of the rest of the book outlined out, and then just strayed when that's where the story took me.
Right. Very cool.
But Steve, yeah, you're right. Steve just goes. And I, at some point, I'm going to print that email and tape it up somewhere in my office because I'll remember those words. Because essentially just said, strap in because we're going.
Yeah, cool. So let's turn to Chasing the Boogeyman then, because that came after the Gwendy Trilogy, and that book was very interesting. I think the reaction that I had, that a lot of people had, is when I started reading it, I said, okay, this is a fiction book. But somewhere along the line, and I think it was when I started coming across the black and white pictures in it, it's morphed into my head like, is this really fiction? Because it feels like awfully like a nonfiction book. So I don't know if you purposely did that or if it was a happy accident that you basically, I think, almost created another genre of like a factual fiction, I guess you could say. I don't know what else to call it, but that was and it was a little unsettling because I'm going, this feels real. So that, kudos to you.
That was my intention.
Yeah.
you seen the movie The Blair Witch Project?
Yeah.
The older one, and that was back in my heyday, like I said. So
right.
I remember very clearly how it was believed to be true by a large percentage of its viewership.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who didn't go see the movie, but they still believed the story of the Blair Witch and these missing children or these missing young adults.
Mm-hmm.
And they even went so far as to make this documentary. And it wasn't a behind the scenes of the movie documentary. It was a documentary about the legend of the Blair Witch that reinforced everything about the movie.
Right.
Which I thought was wonderful and brilliant. And I loved all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I sat down to write Chasing the Boogeyman, I'm a huge true crime fan. I'm a pretty discriminating true crime reader.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely books where you can tell the writer is not approaching the material with enough respect and reverence, and those get tossed pretty quickly. But there are some excellent books. The Stranger Beside Me, Michelle McNamara's Be Gone in the Dark, and quite a few others. James Renner has written several, hold a special place on my shelf.
Mm.
Always been a huge fan of that, and huge respect for the writers who do it and do it well, because it is such a sobering narrative that they're covering.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been interested in learning about the survivors and how they've dealt with it. And in addition to just the crimes and the victims and the perpetrator.
Right.
And pictures have always been a huge part of that experience for me. I look at the pictures, you can picture yourself there.
Mm-hmm.
They're not gory pictures. They're not bloody pictures. They're usually just trampled section of grass behind a shed, which is where the murder took place. But it's so evocative, and to me, it's just so powerful.
It was, yes.
Because this isn't a movie. This isn't make-believe. This is real life, and a young woman or man lost his life there.
Right.
So that patch of trampled grass or that stretch of wood line with a detective standing there, those are the things I really found myself drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been interested, and I've always thought maybe I have a good true crime book in me one day, because I certainly have the empathy.
Right.
I like doing research.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere in there, I always knew I was going to write a story, a novel about my hometown, but I thought it would be more like it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it would have adolescent characters, and it would be some kind of larger than life or supernatural angle. But instead, those two interests of mine, the hometown novel and true crime, it combined into Chasing the Boogeyman. And when I started it, I knew my original intention was I want a Blair Witch, a readership instead of a viewership with a movie. I want to do this with a book.
Right.
And I want to plant fake newspaper articles online. I want to have a 1990s era website put online about the Boogeyman. Mm-hmm. And make it look like it just stopped being updated in like 1997.
Right.
And my older son is a filmmaker, and he's very talented. And I was going to do a documentary like this about the crimes and have it available out there online.
Right.
So I was essentially going to just try to pull this off as a completely true story. But once we sold the book to Simon Schuster, they're like, absolutely not. You can't do that. We'll be sued. You'll be sued. And what's funny is my son told me that earlier. He's like, Dad, you're going to drive the property values down in Edgewood, in these neighborhoods, because they're going to think there was a serial killer.
Right.
So that's my long rambling explanation. Mm-hmm. I knew from day one I wanted to have photographs. And I knew I wanted to have them at the end of each chapter, so that, because that's one thing I dislike is in true crime books, you always have to turn to the photo section. Mm-hmm. It's somewhere else in the book, and you always have to turn to it and look. I want to see what the detective looks like.
Right.
I want to see what this crime scene looks like. I want to see what the victim's mom looks like. The way I did Boogeyman is they're at the end of every chapter. So in my mind, the effect is immediate upon the reader. And I also thought that they're going to build on each other. By the time you looked at 3 or 4 chapters worth of pictures, you're going to be doing what you just said to me. You're going to be going, hold on. Did this really happen? Where do these photos come from?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was the thing. It wasn't a lot of happy accidents occurred with that book. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of credit for very kind reviewers for inventing a new genre and this and that. And a lot of it was happy accident, but the photographs and the way I chose to tell the story with the historical stuff about the town, because I still remember my editor. He's like, I love this. Obviously, we're buying it. We're supporting it. We're going to market it, push it really hard. But you might want to spread out some of the stuff in the beginning and da-da-da. And I remember just telling him, if it's okay with you, I'm going to hold true to it, because I really wanted to write this in the form of a true crime book. And the best ones for me, they set up the history of the town and the place. And then they set up the goings on of that town and the people and the places and the things. and the background. And I did that through my childhood memories. And it was my way of letting the reader know about the town before I let them know about what happens to the town. And it's because it's a story of loss of innocence.
Right.
So it was a weird book from start to finish, and making myself the main character, that was one of those ones that was a happy accident. I wrote the introduction originally, and it was about a normal first person narrator.
Okay. Right.
And by the time I got about halfway finished, I realized this one's me. This is going to be my story about when I came home.
Which further adds to the illusion.
Yeah. And I remember my agent was like, okay. And then fortunately, 2 weeks later, after she read it, she called me back and she said, Rich, you won me over. And I'm like, thank God. Because, and even then she said, if we sell this and the publisher wants to change you to just a fictional first person narrator, are you okay with that? And I remember saying, depends on who the publisher is and their reasoning and all that. I said, I have to think about it. I said, because it became such a personal story for me. All that stuff is true.
Right.
Until you get to the murders. Everything is true.
Yeah. It's, it was a very unique reading experience. And I tip my hat off to you for coming up with something like that, because I don't think I've ever read a book quite like it before. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. I was fortunate because I just thought, I remember right before it came out, it had this tremendous buzz, and the publisher was really excited, and I was excited. And at some point, I turned to my wife and I just said, Kara, I said, Boogeyman really is just this little campfire story. There's no huge plot manipulations. And I said, it's about this small town guy, me. And I'm like, oh God, all these people are excited and the booksellers are excited. And it really is this small, intimate story. And I'm like, what was I thinking? and I had a moment of panic there that I don't usually have. And I'm sure it was because I was laying myself out there on the line.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But what was neat is day one, people started posting and reviews started coming up. And so many of them said, you wrote about my childhood. Yeah. It was great. I'm only a third of the way through the book, but you wrote about what it was like to grow up in my neighborhood. Or you wrote about the childhood I wish I had. Right. And it made me realize immediately, don't ever think that book's about you and your experiences and that it's this thing that other people can't relate to, because that was the biggest happy surprise for me after the fact is I had people write me and say, I forgot what it was like to pop tar bubbles with my fingers on the road. I forgot what it was like to throw a crab apple at a car or climb up on a roof of the school or something. And it was like, that made me very happy because it made other people happy. Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Did I hear right that you're doing a sequel to this? Yeah. I just turned in the sequel. Okay. About a month ago, and it'll be out next Halloween, next October. So I'm excited. Right. Can you give us an elevator pitch about what it's about? Yeah, this one takes place in the present. It still has a nostalgic tone and a nostalgic heart to it, because instead of the first one, I'm talking about my youth, and this one I have sons of my own, and I also have a fictional book called Edgewood Looking Back, which I supposedly wrote based on the success of Boogeyman and all the feedback I got about the growing up in a small suburban U.S. town. Right. So I've got these sections, essentially have interludes between chapters, which some of them are these nostalgic excerpts from that book. Right. More background about Edgewood and growing up there and my friends and me and family. Cool. And then some of them are transcripts from interviews, which I've done with a bad guy. But essentially, it's everything has happened. I'm still going with this. This is all real, and right. This is where I am now in 2022, and I've been fortunate enough to write these 3 books about Gwendy, and Chasing the Boogeyman was a success, and there's a movie, and there's a bad guy in prison, but guess what? There's other stuff that's starting to happen again in Edgewood, and once again, I'm kind of been pulled into it because of my involvement in the original thing. And so there's a little bit of Silence of the Lambs there, but I worked really hard to make sure that there's not, I think that title will probably be tossed out a little bit in marketing by other folks. But like I said, I tried really hard to make sure that the content of the book is nothing like Silence of the Lambs. And you'll be using the picture motif again? Yep. All those pictures are done and turned in, and the captions are written, and I look forward to Simon & Schuster's legal department pulling me through the ringer again, making sure I have permissions from everyone and
right.
all the stuff they did on the first book and worrying about real names. And are you sure your friends are okay with this?
Yeah. Very good.
Like, yes, everyone loves being in the book. They all love that, they feel like they're famous because they're in the book. Everyone except my wife, who hates it. And because she's very behind the scenes and she takes an even bigger role in this book as my wife. So she's not happy.
Right. Well, I'm sure that'll be something that you'll work out between the two of you.
Oh yeah, she's fine, but she's like, I do not want my picture in the book,
right?
And I'm not going to do any podcasts with you because I keep teasing her that. I said, you're going to have to do some podcasts with me now.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we've been going long, and I could talk to you for hours, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Just.
Oh no, I appreciate it. You ask good questions. You got me blabbing about stuff.
That's good.
I really enjoy it.
If you're getting tired, let me know. I do have just a couple of quick things if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, ask away.
Your book that you did with your son, Widow's Point,
right,
was also a screenplay, right?
Oh yeah, it actually was turned into a movie, a low budget movie by Greg Lamberson, who I really respect. And and he wrote the script himself. He asked if I wanted to be involved, and I was like, no, I'm on to the next thing. I'm busy. I trust you. Mm-hmm. And it was a significantly low budget. I thought they did a good job. They got Craig Schaefer, who is a great actor. Yeah. He was in River Runs Through It with Brad Pitt and Clive Barker's Hellraiser.
Right. Yep.
Not Hellraiser, the other one. But yeah, great guy, great actor. The finished film I enjoyed. It's a little campy, like all low budget horror should be.
Yeah, Nightbreed, I think was the.
Yeah, Nightbreed, that's it. But yeah, just again, grateful for the experience. How often, my son Billy and I went to the set for a week and look at each other, and you're like, how often does a dad get to be on set with at the time, I think 20 or 21-year-old son who co-wrote the book that this is based on. And great experience. And had no idea. We just wrote this, little haunted lighthouse story that ended up selling to a half a dozen overseas countries and has done well, print and ebook, and turned into a movie. So who would have guessed it?
Right. Oh, very cool. That must have been quite gratifying to do something with your son like that. That's got to be very cool.
Absolutely. Well, people ask me all the time, what's your favorite project that you've ever done? And I'm like, man. Yeah. I said, it's really hard to outvote working with your literary hero.
Sure.
In some ways, your literary father, Stephen King, because, again, why I'm doing it. I'm like, but writing with your son, when we have a close relationship already, and just seeing that just again spur his own love for the field and writing, that has to take the cake.
Okay, so today I believe is a big day for you. It's October 25th, and the Gwendy Trilogy box set is out today.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody should be aware of that. So I'm just giving the heads up on that.
A perfect Christmas gift.
Yeah, a perfect Christmas gift. There we go. And I believe you're also set up to do something for Fairy Tale, a Twitter space event.
Oh yeah. You know what? I mean Brian Truitt, who writes for USA Today, and he reviewed a Final Task and Fairy Tale. Yeah, he emailed me last week and just said, "Would you want to be involved in this?" He's like, "I figured you've read it," and I actually read it in manuscript. I was fortunate to do that over a year ago.
All right.
But he asked if I wanted to be involved, and I was like, sure. He's like, all right, I'll get back to you. And then what's funny is I saw it on Twitter. I'm like, oh, I'm doing something Thursday. So he did email me this morning with the details, but I haven't read all about it yet. But yeah, Thursday I'll be doing something on Twitter for Fairy Tale, and really happy to be doing it.
So what's the format? Are you like just tweeting out things? Or
I don't even know.
Oh,
that's why I need to read his email. But I was at the office to do some time. What's the word I'm looking for? I essentially I had a deadline. I had to get some stuff done this morning, and some time sensitive. That's it, Rich. You can tell I'm tired. But yeah, so I haven't had a chance to catch up on my emails, but I'll do that this afternoon when we're finished, and I'll find. I believe it's live tweeting about the book, but I'll find out, and hopefully it's something that I don't need advanced technological skills to do.
Right. That's good. Yeah, I saw that on your Twitter feed, and so I've retweeted it for people to pick up on. I think it's.
Oh, thank you.
Is it Thursday? I think it's Thursday. You're right. It's October 27th, so it might be too late by the time this podcast comes out, but we'll see.
That's okay.
And I think, well, like I said, I could talk for hours, but I'm going to cut it here. And I'll just ask if there's anything that hasn't come up in the course of this interview that you would like to mention at this time.
You know what? I think we covered a lot of ground. I mean, we've got we have a neat little double book or a flip book, whatever you want to call it, that is going to be coming out in the beginning of next year, probably February. Mm-hmm. On one side, it is Steve King and Stuart Onan's A Face in the Crowd, which is, a semi-obscure story from them because for the longest time it was only available as an ebook.
Right.
And then I think it was in a fairly low profile anthology, but never collected, never put in hardcover. And so that's one side of this book. And then you flip it on the other side and it's my novella, A Long December, but it's expanded slightly and retitled The Longest December.
Okay.
Because there was always a few little nitpicks I wanted to throw in there. But the point of that was just to get both stories a wider audience. And Steve and I were talking, and both fans of the old Ace Double science fiction books.
Right. Yeah, I remember those. Yeah.
So I thought, what if we did like a little blockade Billy size book, but it had stories on each end, and he loved that idea. So Stuart agreed, and we got some neat illustrations from the guy who did the Green Mile, and of course I'm blanking on his name right now, which is terrible, but a great artist. And so that's a neat little package that will be coming out early next year. That's probably the only thing we didn't talk about.
Right. And do you have any pokers in the fire for your next writing project?
Signed a 2-book deal with Gallery, Simon & Schuster, Gallery Books. And the first one is this sequel to Boogeyman, which I believe is going to be called Becoming the Boogeyman.
Okay.
And then the second one is going to be the suburban thriller, more along the lines of a Harlan Coben type of a book that I've wanted to write for a while. And then after that, we'll see. I'm itching to write a haunted house book. But we'll see what happens after that.
Right. Is Boogeyman going to end up being a trilogy?
You know what? I think so. No intentions of doing that. There was no intentions of writing the sequel, actually. And then I was mowing the lawn and I thought it came full blown chapter 1 of book 2. And I just thought to myself, oh, my God, because I have no desire to write another book where I'm the main character, no matter how much fun I had.
Right.
But I just thought of what I would be a really compelling first chapter. And at the end of that first chapter, I thought anyone who enjoyed the first Boogeyman to any degree, I would dare them to read the first chapter and to get to the end and the reveal of, at the end of chapter 1 and not want to read the rest of the book. And I thought, if I like the idea that much, then I got to write it. So I did. Very
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's quite an honor to have you on the podcast, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to do this.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime, ask me and I'll come back.
All right. When your next book comes out, I'll give you a ding.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.